Welcome to episode number 212 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording August 20th, 2023. My name's Eric, host of the show, based in Southern Ontario, hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator. I know that one's a shock to everybody, and a computer geek. As a first responder, witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events, started a small preparedness company to help prepare people for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
I'm Scott, a first responder from Ontario. I like learning things, and I worry about our fragile infrastructure. I might be the guy saying, I told you so.
Somebody's got to be the one.
Yeah, this is true.
And I'm Jeff. I'm based in Central Ontario. I'm a target shooter, ham radio operator, general overall handyman, and weather nerd.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad. I'm in Eastern Ontario, part-time amateur prepper, constantly trying to better myself.
Hi everybody, I'm the Frugal Gunny. I recently moved to Northern Ontario, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I'm an off-gridder, a shooter, a hunter, fisher, gatherer, trapper type, and a generalist. I only recently came to accept that I'm a prepper.
All right, if you want to help support the show and keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air, you can buy some swag. We've got the Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt and the tactical Velcro patch, because it's no good if it's not tactical, at prepperpodcast.ca. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
If you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and like us on Facebook and submit a review on iTunes. Also, we want your feedback, good, bad, or if there's just a topic you want us to cover. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
All right, we've got some darkening content for you in this episode. We're going to start off with some recent news. We'll move into our personal preps and what we've done since the last episode. We're going to get into the main topic. We're going to get into some lessons from the past and focusing on the 2003 blackout. So let's move into the news.
So I'm sure, I mean, if you're in Canada, at least, hopefully you've heard and been paying attention to what's happening out in BC and the Northwest Territories with the wildfires. It's causing a lot of damage, a lot of devastation. There's a comment in the live chat there from Steve's shop, and he's in West Kelowna, and he says, we're evacuated in West Kelowna. It's pretty crazy how reliant people are on organizations. So, yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're here, is to try to get people to not be reliant on those organizations and do what they need to do to be reliant themselves and be able to do what they need to do on their own. I did plop a quick news article in there from Reuters about it, and so
I found it really interesting that for the past couple of nights on the half-hour national news, the first 13 and 15 minutes, respectively, in the last two nights were all about forest fires, evacuation. Like, it was just crazy and terrifying. And it was really interesting when they were talking about some of the areas where fire has damaged power infrastructure, communications infrastructure, and people aren't able to figure out what to do. They have no idea. So, all of a sudden, the value of having a ham radio in your bug out vehicle, like, oh, that sounds kind of appealing.
That's why I have that.
Yeah.
And
the other thing I heard on the news the other night, that and this is probably a Monday night thing, but I'll just kind of throw it out there, that the news was just chirping like there was no tomorrow about the fact that obviously with the issue with the government, that Facebook, aka Meta, isn't putting news articles out on Facebook anymore. And of course the media was all over that and telling them how irresponsible they were and how they were going to cost people's lives for just having a petty thing with the government. But nobody said that the government was responsible for it in the first place. And Meta told them, if you do this, we're going to do that. So anyways, that's just my 5-second rant, and the rest of it is for a Monday night deal. But
or you could just get your news somewhere that's not Facebook.
Bingo.
Well,
just
what?
saying.
I was going to go there, but I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. But absolutely,
hey, welcome to the rabbit hole.
You that's your one source of information is social media. Like, hello.
Yep.
Anyways,
Touche.
yep.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of just how much forest fire has been going on, it has really kind of jumped up on my threat assessment. Between Maui, BC, Northwest Territories, I have a lot of trees around my house, and historically, I've been far more concerned about the electrical grid. But looking at kind of what's going on, and the sort of all the forest fire issues, all the climate change issues, it's like, yeah, do my long-term preps need to start being hardening my house against forest fire, against extreme heat, against water issues, or like water shortage issues? It feels like there's an awful lot going on.
And from my perspective on that, I mean, that's a really tough call. Is, as preppers, we say, be prepared, have your stuff ready, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, if I'm in the middle of a wildfire, I'm not worried about hardening my house. I'm worried about getting my backside out of there, because,
I would agree with that.
Fire's not something you really want to play with. Insurance will hopefully cover you and replace your house and whatever. But if you go down with your house, you're not getting replaced.
And Jeff's point is spot on. If you can't fight the fire, and you shouldn't expect to be able to fight such a fire, then your first opportunity is to think of rushing to safety. Your secondary objective, though, in the meantime, as part of your planning, if you can, is what can you do within your means? Because, I mean, we all wish we could have a crew of people come in and help trim back all of our tree lines and all of the brush, but all those things take time, money, tools. And if you don't have a lot of tools, then you're going to spend a lot of time, and vice versa. And you need money to buy tools, and you need money to have somebody come over to help you with their tools, generally speaking, unless you have really good relationships with your neighbors, or say a mutual assistance group. Now, those things can come in handy at such a time. But I agree with Scott's concern here is what do we think about? In my situation, when I was facing that very same thing, I remember thinking, okay, I need to get my valuables out if I can, but I don't want to risk life and limb doing so. Thankfully, I had an awful lot of help and assistance in getting those effects out of there, but that was an option for me. If thinking about moving all of your belongings out to safety is just crazy, and for most people, I think it would be, then at that point, you have to think of at least how do you keep your personal safety, and those are your family. And if you can band together with other friends, that's a great strategy to follow. But also anything you can do for preparedness within your area. So I'll remind everyone of the guide that I used when I had to think about how far back do I need to trim brush and not have anything standing. I used the BC Smart Fire series of guides. There's a whole series of them, and they're free. You can go out there and find them. They're downloadable in PDF. So if you want to print them off, you can print them out. If you like offline stuff, you can download them to your phone or tablet or whatever device you're using. And they're simple. They have a really great guide. And I relied on that when preparing the property. In the end, I didn't have a major fire issue that occurred. We ended up having rain. But that would be my first concern, is have your escape plans and your go plans ready and your go stuff ready. Meds for 3 days, food for 3 days, water, etc. But also, if you can mitigate, it's so much worth it. Property damage these days is really difficult to recover from. It's costly. And insurance companies are not fond of paying out, as we know. So anything you can do to prevent is huge, in my opinion. So that would be my only guidance, because that's what I followed. I'm sure some of you have better or other experiences you can tell us about. What have you got?
Well, and that's the exact kind of thing I'm talking about, sort of hardening the property. I agree with you, Jeff. If there's fire at your doorstep, you stayed way too long. But, ahead of time, trimming back tree lines and cleaning gutters and, a lot of these things are just things that have risen to higher importance in my mind of late.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, you know, and I guess when I said that, I didn't mean just run away. Yeah, do your part, trim back the branches, take down the dead tree, do all that kinds of stuff to, even if you have to evacuate, hopefully you can come back and there's still something there because you've done your due diligence, right?
Great point. I think we all would love a moat in times like
with
these.
Alligators. With
alligators, sure, and laser
Sharks.
Laser sharks.
Yeah.
Laser sharks.
Come on, sharks.
Awesome. If I had my druthers, that's what I'd have. But even then, does that help you from sparks and embers that go flying through the air? You know, that's another hard one. So yeah, I imagine one could spend a lot of money hardening their homes, and if you can do it, probably worth it. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Well, I mean, my thoughts about it are, okay, so if you have a sprinkler system, we're on a well, but I'm assuming if there's a serious fire around here, we're going to lose natural gas, so I can't use that for a generator. We're going to lose power, so I can't trust that for the well. So do I need like a on-site large battery bank so that I can keep running my well to keep a sprinkler system going when I have done the smart thing and left?
You need it for other reasons.
I would. So knowing a little bit about electrical draw, I'd say you're gonna probably need a pretty healthy battery bank to sustain a pump of some kind to feed, to keep your irrigators or whatever devices you're using to keep everything cooled down going. I would say probably I'd be looking at some sort of long or large diesel storage generator platform of some kind so that you have the ability to preload it with a whole bunch of fuel. But even then, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, that level of generator investment. But I'm sure there's something one could rig if they're pretty creative and handy.
And
surplus
Rock and
government.
Ryan in the live chat there has a good point there. Eric brought it up, does it in his preamble that he's been in emergency services and sees the over-reliance on it. And, Rock and Ryan's got a valid point there. He says some of these organizations that people rely on to be there for support lack the capacity to actually perform. They say they're confident, they're prepared, but they demonstrate poor skills when basically the shit hits the fan and they're needed to be there. So not all of them, not every one of them. There are some good organizations out there, but anything I'm going to go out on the limb and say anything that's sort of half-assed government related probably isn't one that you want to be relying on.
Well put, Jeff. Well put.
Very well put. And I will say this to back Rock and Ryan, because I really love his comment. He says, they say they are confident, they're prepared. I'm going to say that any competent communications officer would elicit such a same strategy and recommend the very same thing be said. Because the last thing they want is for people to panic and not have confidence in those very organizations that they rely on. Because then funding might dry up. Because other long-term consequences and effects may occur. So one can understand that, but that being said, prudence says, right, let's be prepared and as self-sufficient as possible whenever possible. That's what I say anyway. But within means. So I love Scott's challenge. How does one keep sprinklers fed and keep water irrigating around the property to reduce risk of fire? Because that's what the fire services would do to prevent fire. They would actively hose down a property so that chance of ignition from superheated atmosphere or from flying embers is greatly reduced. So, okay, what can we do to do that for ourselves? I thought about that at my property, and I'd love to share what I came up with. It's not the greatest idea, but it's based on something I saw one individual do. And he was my mentor. And he had some time as a firefighter in the woods managing wildfire. And what he did is he bought himself a Honda water pump. Honda generator water pump, all in one unit. All he had to do was pour the fuel in, and he had his own fire hoses. That might be the harder thing to source, would be the hoses to feed this thing, because you can't just hook up a regular garden hose to move that kind of water efficiently. You're going to need some firefighting type quality hoses, and that's what he had. And I'm sure with his connections and his know-how and his previous experience, it was easy for him to locate those. But that's what I was barking.
I'll interrupt you there, Gunny.
Please,
they are available commercially. I know a place in Ottawa that anybody can walk in off the street and order the hoses and all the connections to go with it. You don't need a company name. You don't need to be a fire service.
Talking later. Because
I'll find it on Google and send you a link.
That was my best quick solution. Now, for all of that to work, thank you, Brad. That's a major one, because my friend who recently is setting up his own off-grid property, he's also got access to water. But how do we get enough volume of water to fight or prevent or mitigate encroaching fire? Right? That's the big question. And so I saw what this little Honda pump could put out, and he used it just to flatten out gravel. Right. So he had brought in a whole bunch of gravel into the property. And, over time, you need waterfall, rainfall, and natural processes to tamp down that gravel. And so what he did to accelerate that process, he's used this handy dandy little Honda generator pump. And he used that, and he had me operating the fire hose. So I can attest to just how much throughput you can get if you have the right piece of gear. Now, what that is, what the specs are, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I would love if we have a specialist listening in to be able to come forward and give us some recommendations. That would be really cool if anybody knows
somebody like a firefighter might help.
Yeah,
that might be something we can do.
I think we know one of those.
I think we know at least one who likes to go on rants about carbon monoxide every once in a while.
Ding! There it is.
There it is. All right, before we go, look at that. No, I think we probably have to get another episode going on wildfires and prevention and such, just based on the squirrel off here of one news article. Yeah, we'll get another episode going for sure on wildfires and prevention and what we can do. And maybe we'll bring Alan back for at least one. One other quick announcement. It's not published in the news, but Scott and his wife welcomed a baby girl into the world on Friday. So congratulations to Scott.
Thank you. It was after midnight, so it was actually Saturday. The drama started.
Well, there we go. Saturday it is.
You've jumped ahead. That was one of my preps. I've added a MAG member.
Oh, look at that. Well,
I love it.
Well, we jumped ahead a touch, but it had to make the news section. It's the more appropriate spot, I think.
Fair enough.
Absolutely. Yep. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, with that, let's move into what we've done lately for preps. Apologies for stealing your thunder there, Scott, but how about you lead us off?
I wasn't going to say anything about it other than I added a MAG member.
Oh, there you go.
With all of this squirreling off about forest fires, I've been learning more about my chainsaw, getting some lessons from a friend, and plan on taking down a whole bunch of standing dead sort of in the woods around my house, because that seems like a good idea with everything that's going on. I like learning stuff. I like knowing how to use my tools, and it sounds like a good mitigation prep. So it sounds like a win-win-win.
We should test our things.
No,
Yeah, I think it's apparently a thing.
That's what I'm gathering, is we should test our stuff.
That's a novel idea.
Okay, I'll get on.
Episode 212, and we're just learning this.
Chainsaws can be good for zombies too.
This is true. Yep.
Very useful skill.
Absolutely. I did some more yard cleanup, a little bit of fuel rotation, work, slept, ate, went and did groceries, did laundry, did work. That's it.
Hey, it's got to happen, I guess.
You did some work.
I'm sorry,
did you go to work at all, Brad? Did you go to work at all?
No, I missed Friday.
Okay.
Man, slackers. Anyways, I did some fuel rotation. I did a bunch of food prep and testing and working with my canner, my pressure canner a little bit, just trying to get the bugs out of it, kind of make myself feel more comfortable doing it. I'm pretty well almost there now. And I did my generator tests, make sure my generators were working properly. And so just in case something happens.
Is anyone going to mention Jeff can just wipe the bugs out and they shouldn't be there in the first place? Or I saw Gunny's brain going there. I knew he was going to go there.
I thought it.
Jeff, are you aware of some weather pattern that we are not?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Jeff, what is it you've been pressure canning?
Bugs, apparently.
No. Nice try, though. Although apparently crickets are fine.
Oh, boy.
Good, but
here we go.
No. I've experimented. I did a couple of cans of I did some ground beef. I've done some chicken. I've done some tomatoes, like tomato paste or tomato sauce, whatever. So I'm just kind of, 1 or 2 cans of everything. I'm kind of testing to make sure that my timing's right, everything's sealing fine, and that when I open it up in a couple of months, it's not going to kill me. So
all good things.
I love Steve's comment that Carmen took her canners when they evacuated.
Yep.
I saw that. That's awesome.
Well, hold on, guys. We appreciate that.
I love
for myself,
comment.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yep. I'll put it up on the screen for everybody.
Thank you. Crickets are good for fish bait.
Yep. It's a good call, Denny.
Yep.
All right. For myself, I know this one's going to be shocking, so hope everybody's ready. I did some more radio work, still playing around with this amplifier. So getting it kind of dialed in and learning everything I can about it. It's been a ton of nerd fun, but kind of getting their work in now. Getting ready for winter, like we talked about in our last episode. So I've been taking care of a couple of the outside projects that have been looming all summer that I've been saying, yeah, I'll just do it tomorrow. One of them being the sump pump drain out in the front yard. I dug out about 10 feet-ish for that and then kind of stopped. So I did the full 25 feet that I wanted to do and got all the pipe and everything and the gravel and got all that done this past week. So now it is draining appropriately and is going to be a non-issue in the winter, because had I have continued with I'll do it next week, it would just be a frozen mess. So got on that on a nice day and got her all done. So it's all good to go now.
Nicely. Trench work is good for the soul.
Sure.
And the back and the arms and the legs.
This is why they invented Advil and beer.
I was most upset at all the trench work I had already done when I found out that with the backhoe I could do the same trench work in about 2 minutes.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
It was the difference between $450 rental and a couple hours of shovel work.
I'd grab the shovel.
Yep.
But I'm
I
frugal.
agree with that.
Yep. I took a page out of your book.
Be more reliant on thyself than others.
Yep.
That's right.
Absolutely.
I love my shovel. I use it a lot. I have a backup too.
There you go.
That being said, I also did some fuel rotation. I resumed my workout. That's body prep. Getting harder and harder to resume after not doing it. So I just got to stopping my workouts. And that won't happen anymore. I'm still going through gear, redistributing it, and I'm still in search of my next gig. Otherwise, I'm really enjoying this topic for all night.
Very nice. That's a good segue into the topic.
Not so artful, but I'll take it. Thank you.
So this evening, we figured we would talk about some lessons from the past, specifically focusing on the 2003 blackout. So those of you that were around or old enough to remember it, pretty significant event in a lot of people's lives. possibly even one of the reasons why some of the listeners or even the panelists got into the prepping world. It might have been your catalyst, maybe not. But it took out power in pretty much all of Ontario for quite a time. Some were only down for 24 hours, some were down for 3 or 4 days. And it definitely shook things up and got a lot of people talking, and woke a few people up into the preparedness type of mindset, because a lot of people just figured the power would be on forever and we'd never have a big thing like this happen. Maybe it would go out for a half hour or an hour, but not multiple days. So it was an interesting time in history, and we figured we'd go back because what are we at here? The 20th anniversary now of it.
Yep,
so,
20th anniversary on the 14th of August.
Yeah,
Yep.
So it's been a while, but it's still something that is alive and well in many preppers' minds. And we figured we'd go back, kind of tell a few stories, rehash a few things, kind of talk about where we were at the time, and just chat about it. So
Yeah.
in
So
terms of what happened? Just
go ahead, Scott.
The background physics of it. You have to remember that the electric grid power flows at all times through all available routes. Production and use are simultaneous and have to be balanced, and bulk electricity can't be stored. So when you kind of consider all this thing and you have this giant interconnected grid where everything touches everything, you have to remember that for context for sort of how this giant systemic failure happened. So, Jeff, I will let you run the narrative of it's a warm Tuesday in August.
Yeah, thanks. Now that you stole most of my thunder, I'm only kidding. August 14th, 2003. It was one of the largest power outages to hit the U.S. and Canada. So, on the anniversary, I kind of threw a thing out there saying, hey, you know what, we should talk about this. And, could it happen again? Absolutely. I'm actually surprised it hasn't. What happened? Why did it happen? What lessons did we learn from it? All that kinds of stuff, kind of throwing it out to all the panelists and the folks in the live chat there. So I'll just kind of step into a bit of kind of piggybacking on what Scott talked about is what happened and why did it happen? And basically, it started out centered around the Cleveland, Toledo, Ohio area. There was some power some power producers, so some hydroelectric or electric generators that were offline and different things going on. They had a one of their systems that kind of tells them how much power they need, does estimating, does all that. It was not operating properly. It was missing data. It wasn't working right. There was one of the the really big one is there's an alert system that goes into the main power operator for that area that tells them when something is going wrong, and that system failed. So while everything was going on, they had the really main people that were responsible for the power and everything had no clue what was happening until it was well past the point of no return. So basically what happened is, as Scott said, it was a bit of a warmer day. It wasn't a super hot day, but it was warm enough. A lot of air conditioners were running. There's issues around, electric motors and how they affect the grid a little bit. And anyways, one of the lines got hot. Everybody knows as things get warm, they expand. It sagged. It hit a tree that probably should have been trimmed and it wasn't. It shorted out. The system recognized that and tripped that high voltage line offline. So of course, now that that's offline, the hydro's got to go somewhere else to get to its destination. So it goes over to the next line And now that next line has what it normally had plus what that other line is dumping into it. And as Murphy's Law would have it, exactly the same thing happens. They're pumping tons of electricity through it. It's getting hot. Same thing. The line sags, hits a tree, shorts out, trips it offline. Now they're down to just one line feeding that whole Cleveland, Toledo area. And of course, one line isn't going to support it. It gets up to about 120% of its capacity. And the system says, hold on a minute here. This is unsustainable. Something's seriously gone wrong. And it also goes offline. And that just started cascading the whole thing. And of course, while all this is going on, and it's not simultaneous, there's minutes in between these things happening. The main control room has no clue what's going on until their phones start ringing from power plants saying, excuse me, what is going on? And why are you not telling us what is going on? And that's when, like I say, the lights or the headlights started going off in people's heads, and they're like, well, what are you talking about? We don't know anything. We don't. There's a YouTube link I've put in there. We can maybe throw it in the live chat if people want to have a look at it. And it basically explains it. I think it's the most plausible. There's all kinds of different, I guess, stories out there. I think this one's kind of the most plausible. It seems to make sense. It comes from what I would consider a half reliable source, not the government. And things just started cascading. Now you've got, all the power needed for Cleveland, which is a major city, coming through smaller hydro lines, and there's more choke points.
Distribution centers.
Yep, exactly. And then the cascade started. Everything is overloading. And as soon as it's overloading, it's like something's wrong here. Maybe we've got a short, maybe we've got a fault, and they're tripping offline. And that's when it really took off and went super fast. And basically within a couple of minutes, half of the United States, and as Eric said, the whole province of Ontario went dark.
Yep. As
Scott mentioned, part of the problem is obviously you can't store hydro. It is a as needed thing. It's bulk, but yeah, you can't store it. It has to be managed all the time, and that was the problem. It wasn't being managed because the alert system that was supposed to tell them that something was going wrong wasn't working. Yep. And like I said, it was until they got to the point of no return that people started going, well, wait a minute, something's happening here. Now what do we do? And it was, like I said, it was too late, and it basically shut everything down.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of those commodities that we rely on daily, and we don't even think about it, right? It's just you wake up in the morning, you flip the light on. You go, you do whatever it is you're going to do in the morning. You cook your breakfast. In the evening, the sun goes down, you turn the lights on. You don't think about using electricity, and then all of a sudden, all this cascade happens, and it's gone. And now what? Right? It's that eerie feeling of where'd the power go?
Now I have to qualify
and it's funny for me. I distinctly remember it. I was outside doing yard work. I think I was cutting the grass, and I was doing a bunch of other stuff. I wasn't even aware for the first couple of hours that the power was even out. I'm going to guess it went out somewhere around the 4 p.m. time frame, give or take. And I'm going to say it was probably 5:45, 6 o'clock. I'm like, okay, I'm getting hungry. I'm going to go make something for dinner. I go in the house, and I'm like, oh, my power was out. Oh, okay. No big deal.
Yep, happens.
It happens. I'll just go into town and get something to eat. And as I'm preparing to do that, my friend down the road who knows that, or, kind of come up and said, do you know what's going on? And I'm like, no, my power's out, but yeah, it's no big deal. And they're like, yeah, half of North America's out. And at that point I was like, oh crap, I'm not getting something to eat. I'm not. And admittedly, I was not in the real prepper mindset then. So, I will say this, my vehicle had less than a quarter tank of fuel. I had a generator. I had a small tank of gas for it. That's all I had. So I was in.
It's a start.
I was in a bit of trouble right basically from the get-go, and that caused a huge, big. That incident for me is what caused me to be where I am today. That caused that momentous shift in my mindset, my thinking, my preparedness, my whole, and getting around the whole thing. So
the sad
that's
part
something,
is using an electric lawnmower.
mhm.
Well, I'm glad Jeff brought up what happens when the power goes out. And I used to use it as an example when I was delivering training. I would compare what we consider the standard of reliability was the power grid.
Yep.
You'd go into a room, you flick the switch, and it's on. And you're used to that most of your life, depending on where you live. So I lived for a portion of time in PEI. That's Prince Edward Island. It's an island. So you can imagine power delivery there could be shaky at times, and it was. Sometimes we would lose power for 3 to 4 days at a time. And so as a young lad, I was used to losing power and what we had to do. And yeah, it changed our life back then, even before cell phones. It meant that we couldn't watch TV. It meant that only battery-powered radios could function. It meant that to cook, we had to use the wood stove. Thankfully, we had a wood stove in the house at that time. And we were able to make good food with it too. I have very fond memories of wood stoves because of that reason. Because at a time when everything else failed us, well, all we had to do was load the wood stove and we were able to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But the experience of reliable power in the cities in North America is a bit of an exception across the world, isn't it? There are some
That's
areas
a really good point
where they only have power for 2 to 3 hours at a time if they get power that day. Right, and that's electrified places. There are other places where the grid is so shaky that you're lucky to have any. And so people resort to all kinds of trickery and machinery to get power running sometime. And when they do have it running, they prioritize what they do with it. So we are so lucky here in North America to have the reliability of this kind of a grid. However, we have all seen it fail. Yep. And we now know some of its failings. When it happened, when it occurred, I was in an odd position to witness it because I worked in technology at the time. The technology that I worked in was reliant on the grid. And I happened to have been working in IT security. And I happens to also have worked in business resumption. BRP is what we called it back then, but it was also called DRP, disaster recovery. Right, so we had these disciplines in the world of IT and in IT security, but they weren't yet fully fleshed out. So I was this young entry-level IT security analyst. So I'd had investigative trainings. I had this really analytical mind, and bam, power goes out. But what we were dealing with in the middle of that power outage made me really think about what was truly going on, because we had a great reference here from one of our listeners about what the authorities say they're confident they can do. Well, I was working for those people. So let me tell you what was going on at that time. For me, it was also very formative for me. Like Jeff and like some of the other panelists here, I was not really a prepper up until that time. I had worn green, so I knew about pre-planning for certain kinds of missions that we were doing at that time in my little sphere of the world, in my tiny little thing. But I wasn't yet really a prepper. And I was working in IT security. We were close to the data center operations. And at the time, we had a really bad worm infection. I think it was like Lovesan or MS Blaster. And this was a crazy time period in those years because, again, IT security was not a fully fleshed out discipline yet. We had really great guidance from our friends in the US who had experienced a fair amount of technological implementation at that time. And yet, though, we were in rough shape. A lot of our systems were down. Our desktops were completely out of control. And so we were in the middle of an actual phone call, a cross-country conference call, old school conference calls. And we were trying to deal and coordinate with what to do about this thing, this worm that was breaking everything down. And then the power flipped off right in the middle of that. I remember it was late. It was hot outside. The power went out. And a lot of us looked at each other in the room with a bit of dread. Like, oh, crap. What do we do now? Because, I mean, we only have so much of a generator over there. This is a large building, a 21-story building. It's not built to be run off a generator. So all of a sudden, we decided to send everybody home. I was part of the building emergency organization at the time because, again, I had worn green, so I was kind of go oriented. Let's go help. Let's run to go and help people out, right? And there were people in the building that had mobility issues. So the first thing that happens when the elevators go out, well, you got to think about them, and you got to think about what happens in the middle of a fire if power is out. Because, I mean, fire is a real problem at the best of times. But when power is out and there's a hard time for firefighting equipment and firefighters to get to you because power is out and traffic lights are out everywhere and there's traffic jams everywhere, now you got a real hazard. And this is a building that held about 2,500 people. So we're talking about major potential problems here. So we evacuated everybody, and us IT people thought this is a great opportunity for us to go and clean up workstations. We told everybody to shut down their workstations and go home, and we started running like little ants, running around with floppy disks, sneaker netting across all of the building floors, trying to figure out how to clean up all this mess that we were in. And so we were trying to make phone calls between McAfee and Microsoft and running around with antivirus kits from place to place. So while we were doing all that, meanwhile, the world outside was going a bit wonky and funny and different because where I was living, the power was actually out for quite a few days. And so while there was this power outage, I still had to drive into work. And so I still had to find fuel. And that was my biggest challenge, is finding fuel. And I had to line up in certain places only to find out, you could see the attendant coming outside to wave and tell you, no more fuel, no more fuel. So the fuel stations that did have generators and were able to provide service all ran out of fuel. So there was a number of compounding problems that in normal circumstances wouldn't be a big issue. When a gas station runs out of fuel, well, they don't typically run out of fuel. Usually the attendant every day, it's somebody's responsibility to go and put the big dipstick into the tank and verify what the fuel levels are. And so they usually call in the order. Sometimes it's pre-scheduled because there's a high flow area and you got a lot of consumption. And so they come in and they drop it off. Well, it was really hard to find fuel. And so the people that did have generators had, of course, gone out and stocked up as soon as they could, or were lined up trying to fill up their jerry cans. Meanwhile, you had people who were panicking, trying to get to stores. So they were trying to fill up and hoard fuel in certain cases. There was random stories of panics in stores, but not many. For the most part, people went outside and they grilled. There was a lot of food lost. I remember that. A lot of people lost their food. There was some panic buying going on. There were some stores that had to shut down because they couldn't keep their produce fresh and their product fresh. But the big notable thing for me at the outset of this, and there have been other incidents since where this was the first symptom that there was a problem, other than, of course, the lights going out, people couldn't get a hold of one another. The cell phone switches were completely jammed. And in certain cases, phone lines were having a hard time coping with all of the increased phone traffic. And that caused us issues when trying to coordinate across the country. So one infrastructure problem can very, very quickly cascade to other infrastructure problems. And we ran into that day.
And it's funny you say that, Gunny. I worked in an emergency service, and and we relied on cell towers for our communication and our ability to do communication. And there were several of the cell towers that within probably 3 hours of the power going down, they also went down. Their generators didn't work. The battery banks went dead because the generators weren't coming on to charge them. And, you know, they weren't thinking about a long-term power outage. Their thing was, hey, get us through 3, 4, 5 hours. 99% of the time, we're good to go. So, yeah, it caused a lot of problems.
It sure did. And I would dare say that up until that year, that power outage, the business resumption and the disaster recovery as a knowledge base didn't really have a major impetus other than 911, right? And maybe the Trade Center attacks, right? We didn't have a major driving motivation to do a better job of actually testing activation plans, right? So sure, your organization can develop a plan for an emergency, but do you actually test it? And so how do we extend that practice then to our personal lives? Do you have a fire escape plan? Have you actually tested it? Have you found a way to make it fun so you're not panicking your children and your families when you're testing out the plan nor activating it? Because one thing that we now know is that in training, in an emergency, you will act out your training. If you don't have training to deal with that emergency, you may end up in the 3 F's, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So if you've got training, so if you've got pre-planning, pre-thought, you can kind of think about it. So as a result of that event, I started thinking all the way as up front, okay, well, what we ran into was a capacity issue with our generator. So the first generator I bought was way oversized and way heavy and not practical at all and loud as hell. You could hear it from across the country, in my opinion. But I had one then, right? But I wasn't thinking about all of the little nuances where, okay, well, does it have to be usable too? Are you going to buy a big unit and have it sit there all the time? So applying this thing that we all of a sudden did in government and large organizations that are regulatory to go ahead and push the envelope and not only develop their emergency plans, but to test them. And when their tests came up with weaknesses, then we trained to ensure that we can repeat it. So we did building emergency drills where every month we would start doing the drill and we would train people to get out of the building and go to a safe area. And we were testing communication systems too as a result of this. But out of all that being said, I still have major questions remaining after that incident. And because part of it is that at the time I was already an IT security investigator. So a highly analytical mind. And one of the things that as an investigator you are encouraged to do, I don't think it's something they can teach you to do, but they encourage you that if there's a question that's bugging you about something you're looking at, if you're collecting evidence, just blindly collecting evidence, and all of a sudden something is bugging you in that, what you're collecting, you should probably look at it. Right? And so I was taught to look at patterns. And so in the days after that major event, I was looking at a lot of interesting patterns and information that were coming about. One of the big questions I have is what systems were fighting worms across the infrastructure that failed? That they've kind of kept from us to a certain degree. There's a lot of explanations that are high level, but I would like to know more because I know what that worm was doing to our systems. And I would love to know more where it originated from, who sponsored it, who developed it, who disseminated it. I have those questions about what happened to those management systems. But the biggest question I have at all, and you're going to have to pull out your propeller hats here, everybody, maybe your tinfoil.
Ooh, right, here we go.
Why were the Canadian Armed Forces
Finally,
deployed
it gets
at the
better.
border for an exercise 3 hours previous? I have
That is a good question.
Yeah, I have that question. Why? Not totally glossed over by everybody, it seems. But that salient point really bothers me, and I don't know. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. As a former investigator, coincidences are really hinky. They should bother you. They should bother everybody when there's a coincidence that is unexplained. So I have a hard time with that one. Our forces were at the border prior to the outage. We had worms fighting. We were fighting worms across the infrastructure in many different places. What happened?
I never connected the worm thing. I was working just as a repair tech, and we were battling that exact same worm. I remember that because the influx of machines that were coming in, because it was just locking the machines up. But it was just another, here's a wave of a worm coming in. You got to deal with it. And that's interesting. That's, I never at that point in time connected the worm to the infrastructure. Because I didn't have that IT sec mindset. I was just the repair guy that was, okay, here's the influx, fix it, kick it out the door. That's interesting. If we have any other of our listeners here who are IT sec or have knowledge more and can help me figure this out, because that's been bugging me ever since, my friends. Yep. And when you think about it, all the warning systems were not operating. The main control centers were not getting the alarms. All the systems go down without the main center knowing about it. And then you tie in the armed forces being at the border.
What gives?
Look at that. 20 years later. Now I'm wondering.
Hinky. It doesn't pass my sniff test.
Where's my hat with the spinner on it? Because you've got my attention.
Right?
Yep.
This is a hard one for me.
Rabbit hole get bigger?
Yeah, I have a hard time with this one. And so if somebody has something that can help assuage that for me, hey, I'm all ears. I am all ears, because that's been bugging me ever since. And that's one of the things that drives me as a prepper. It's not that I have a mistrust of government, is that I've worked for them. So I know what happens on the inside.
But here's the funny part. Until 10 minutes ago, I didn't even know that this whole worm thing was going on at the same time that this thing was going on.
100%.
No clue.
Yep.
Now that you're mentioning it,
I am in that same boat.
The dots are starting to connect, going, okay, we've got the worm. The systems weren't operating. They weren't getting the alarms. They weren't getting the data from the other sources. What was going on?
And if I want, I'm going to add to your propeller hat moment, bud. I'm not going to make it better. I'm sorry.
Here we go.
So we had all the focus on a power outage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about information warfare. Really, let's be smart here.
What was going on in the background?
Thank you. Yes. What were we not looking at? Well, everybody was focused on the power outage.
What is it?
Have to think that way.
Misdistraction?
Possibly, right? If I have, so taking off my IT sec hat, putting up my old green soldier hat, right? The first thing we want to do as soldiers is blind the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
You cut off lines of communication. You cut off recce access points. You cut off navigational lines. You cut off satellite access. You deny the enemy visuals. So you hide all your stuff. You hide your movements. Okay. So what happened then? Because again, I see evidence of pre-planning, and pre-planning means something was up. So thank you, Joan. Smoke and mirrors. What were we not seeing while the power is out? Again, I told you I had some propeller hat stuff, some tinfoil stuff for you here, because I still have those questions and I'm waiting for answers. Yep. That's been over 20 years. That's not the only thing I have questions about.
But one of them.
Gunny, we have a lot of questions about you.
I'm sure you do. I have questions about me.
Up until this evening in this conversation, I never took the power outage and kind of looked at it with the focus of all this other behind the scenes stuff going on. State actor, anybody?
You now know that a lot of malware is state sponsored.
Yep. I choose state actor for 500.
I say so myself. So right on. Okay, we know what the odds are of state actors.
Yep.
All right. So who benefits?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
That is the next question, because that's what we have to do in investigations. You have to know means, motive, opportunity. Right. Opportunity. It's easy. If it's digital, it's not really all that secure. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And if we rewind back to 2003 era, the whole cyber war thing is just getting off the ground, right? It's not happening, but it's not where the point where it is today.
That's
right. So that could have even very well just been a test.
Well, we already had Tempest back then.
Yep.
I don't know if I'm going to get carried off into court for using the word, but Tempest is a set of technologies that can, at a distance, find out what your keystrokes are. That was back then. That was 20 years ago. And that was old 20 years ago. This is old stuff, Tempest. So
what do we have now?
What do we have now? Right.
Tempest 2.
Exactly.
Again,
I'm not tinfoil hatting here. This is reality. This was my everyday work. I worked in IT sec. So there are certain things I know I can discuss with freedom and knowledge and understanding. So I'm just going to highlight again, friends, who benefits from our IT infrastructure being vulnerable. Because if it's on IP, if it's on the internet protocol, it is not secure by design. Internet protocol, short recap, where does it come from? This is like a total parenthesis here on our topic, but internet protocol is something that was based for nuclear installations that were communicating with each other originally under DARPANET. It was a communications network. It was sponsored by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. That's a defense agency's network. And at first, it was only defense agencies and research institutions that were plugged into it. And then eventually it was academic institutions, certain ones. And the next thing you know, it was wide open.
Was it not called first the intranet?
That I'm not sure of, but it was definitely called DARPANET. And as a result of it going public, we began to use the word intranet to define a network that is internal to your organization, but not connected to the internet, which is a network of networks.
Yes.
Right. And so
that almost sounds like another whole podcast for.
Oh, hell yeah.
It could be, but IP as a whole was designed to run on a wire protected by a guard and a dog and gates, right? It ran on a wire, my friends, but now it's worldwide. So the wire, we've invited everybody to plug into the wire, so to speak. Again, I'm vastly simplifying how the internet works, but essentially it was not a protocol that was designed for security. So if you do have any measure of perceived security today on the internet, it's because we have built layers on top of this insecurity, and we try to rely on that network and that organization of layers, right? In the same way that if I want to defend a nuclear installation, I might have a fence, and then I might have a series of deeper gates, and then further in, I'm going to have armed guards where they can't be seen, where we can't see what kind of weapons they're running. Then further in, I might have vicious dogs, and then stuff nobody can see at all before you can even get close to that really core stuff, so it can't be hijacked and all kinds of crazy stuff going on, right? That's the idea behind defense in depth. So that's what we've been trying to practice over the internet for the last 30 years, is trying to secure something that isn't by nature. And so we've had to create layers over top of different layers to try and achieve some measure of trust. And we see today that we're having some difficulty with that. And I still do, because we saw a grid here back in 2003 that was equipped with IP, it was equipped with networks, and it didn't take much to take it down. All that was needed was for the alert systems, the systems we use to have information and insight into our other systems, those failed. Now today, 20 years past that, we are so much deeper into digital controls and digital systems. And so we now have threat actors that have targeted those very industrial controls that operate nuclear installations, hydro generating stations. They operate industrial capacity of all kinds. So whether you're making chemicals, whether you're making fuel, whether you're fabricating things, we have industrial controls everywhere. If you are running smelting operations, you've got industrial controls, because a lot of the things that we're able to do in mass today are because of automation. And we're more concerned with gathering more and more information about what we're doing, because we're learning from that, right? How much smarter our steel production has become, because we've learned by monitoring what's happening. Well, that's all happening with sensors. All of that's being gathered. We're gathering more data than ever, and it's all being done over an infrastructure that isn't secure by design. So I still have a lot of trust issues with our infrastructure, and that is one of the major things that drives me as a prepper. And that's why I don't have a lot of trust in the internet, nor the things that happen on it, because I've operated some of that infrastructure in the background. I know how fragile it is, and I know how easy it is to misguide people about it. You wouldn't buy that phone if we told you that it wasn't secure by nature, would you? You wouldn't use that digital payment system on your phone if you knew how insecure it was. So naturally, we're not going to allow you to focus on that. We want you to think of how practical it is and all of the day-to-day barriers that technology eliminates for you so that you adopt it. But in reality, it's kind of sending us back, because you may be having trust in a tech that may not be helping you all that well. So how do you fix that? Because I see Joan's comment, and I see already people are being affected by this stuff. And believe me, I am too. I get asked a lot, how do I sleep at night? I have my ways. That's all I have to say. It's not easy.
Turn your router off.
But turn your router off is a good start. I'm serious. And money out of your bank account.
And for the techies that are going to yell at me for that, yes, turn your modem off, turn your switch off.
Yeah, turn your switch off, turn all the digital off, all the Bluetooth, all the Wi-Fi. None of it's secure by nature. None of it is. So if it's not secure by nature, you've put your trust in something it's an illusion. Right. And it's starting to break down. We're seeing it. How many people have experienced a hack in their life or a fraud? Right. Over time, we'll learn more of just how little we can trust the tech. All I can say is that somebody who's worked on the inside, somebody who's had security clearance, somebody who's had to help people fight these things, the best thing you can do is not embark on them in the first place. Unplug. Right. Get out of it if you can. Right? If you absolutely must maintain communications with people, okay, sure, grab a cell phone, but don't expect it to always work. Maybe grab a flip phone so it's less vulnerable. One of the strategies we use in IT that you
can still have those things?
Yes, they do. I've researched it, and I'm considering making the move. And the reason why I'm going to tell people a strategy long-term against technology failure is to gradually reduce your dependence on it. And I mean in every way. And that's going to mean different things for everybody, depending on how wired in you are. I've been trying to do this, again, since 2003. It was a huge eye-opener, because I still haven't had an answer to those questions. So please, if anybody has answers to my questions, by all means, contact me where I've mentioned. But how do I sleep at night? Because the only thing I can do is to know how to unplug and disconnect from it all. And so that's what helps me. Find every way to reduce your exposure to the web. If you have subscriptions, start eliminating them, right? You don't really need them. There's different ways to entertain yourself than using digital. I've learned a ton off the web, so it's hard for me. I've made my living off the internet. Okay, you don't become a self-taught IT security analyst by not using the internet. I had to use it. I had to do things with it that I didn't realize were possible. And so now I have an awareness of what it can and can't do for me. The one thing it can't do for me is feed me. It can only give me money, but if my money can be stolen from me, is it help for me? So gradually disconnect and reduce your exposure to it. You can't do it all at once. Take your time. Right? If you store all your passwords in a password manager, gee, don't you think as a hacker, that'd be the first thing I would try to get into?
LastPass, anybody? LastPass.
Thank you. Anything that gathers passwords for you is a trap for somebody else to go digging and get into. Of course I'm going to go there. I can probably get a dozen passwords in one shot. Why am I going to waste my time calling you or trying to pretend I'm somebody else? I'm going to go and try and hack your silly little password manager.
For those that haven't heard, LastPass is a password manager that was actually hacked. So
thank you. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I want to make sure that people tell me whether I'm wrong or right. And so I like hearing when people, validate what I'm saying because I've lived it.
Thank you for that, Eric. I will not be choosing them.
Yeah. Reduce your exposure as much as humanly possible. How have I done that myself? Okay, so time for real measures. I've eliminated or reduced all instances of Microsoft Windows on my network. I'm sorry, Microsoft. I just can't trust you as far as I can shoot you. And that's far enough.
I think we've squirreled a little bit.
Yes, we've definitely gone far aside, but reduce your technology. If you want, we had this old saying in the IT sec world, security through obscurity. Mm-hmm. Security through obscurity. So disconnect your technology, use different technology, right? Can I suggest Linux as an alternative?
Yep.
Right? If you're thinking Mac is ultra secure, I'm sorry, you're also falling for the propaganda.
It does run for ABSD, so.
Well, yeah, it's good enough. Like any other thing you own, you practice IT sec to a high level and high degree. But trust but verify. It is with tech. So I have a hard time trusting things where I can't have somebody tell me what they see in the code. I'm not a code reader, but there's a lot of really brilliant coders out there. And so the thing you're fighting with is somebody else doing something for you. That's Microsoft and that's Apple and all the commercial operating systems that are out there. Or you can do it yourself. Again, self-reliance. So less technology, reduce your exposure. If you are using technology, try to use technology that increases reliance for you, openness, trust, transparency. Technology is not transparent. We need you to have trust for you to use the tech and for it to sell. So it's not transparent, friends. You have to do your due diligence, right? So reduce your trust, do more offline, right? Store stuff on media, have backup copies of media. Worms can spread. Ransomware infects your removable media and can corrupt your files. So try to reduce exposure as much as you can. That's my best advice. And I think I've gone on way too long about that.
I think we've got another tech episode for sure, because I could go on about this for hours on end as well. So let's set up another IT security episode, and we can squirrel for hours on it. But let's spin it back around to the power grid, and keeping on kind of the IT security kind of thoughts with this worm going on. A lot of the power grid's going to be utilizing SCADA devices as well, right? So you're looking at those which are devices that can remote control systems. They're computerized, a lot of automation that happens there. And they're notoriously insecure because they're built on systems that were initially set up to not operate on the internet. So if we take this theory of the worm being in place, taking over or affecting machinery that initially wasn't supposed to be on the internet, now it's on the internet because people wanted to put it on the internet to make it easier to use without thinking about security. Again, we're going back down the IT security world here, but get into the worm thing. SCADA, internet, power grid, power goes down. It's a really interesting angle that, I'm gonna be losing some sleep cycles to this.
Well,
are any of you running Ring?
I'm going to pull it back. I'm going to pull it back to
go for it, Scott.
Look at disasters and the entire Swiss cheese model of it's disaster. No one hit the meltdown button at Chernobyl. It was a whole combination of little unfortunate coincidences. This went wrong and that went wrong. So it's not necessary. Yeah. I don't want to tighten my tinfoil hat and assume there are bad actors at play here. But yes, computer viruses are an issue. In the clip that we'd posted in there, was independently mentioned by a couple of different panelists. It's the practical engineering Grady Hillhouse is fantastic. It's a 20-minute presentation.
Great video
on YouTube talking about the engineering side of what went wrong. And, they acknowledge the computer systems that went wrong. So yes, when worms and viruses are running rampant in sort of the 2000s, that's one of the layers of Swiss cheese where the hole just lined up and eventually everything fell through. And that is common in every disaster, because if one piece of Swiss cheese moves over and there's no hole there, the disaster doesn't happen. So you don't hear about it because it's a near miss. And someone in the industry hears about it, but it's not a problem. It's not a disaster. So,
and to Scott's point, I want to emphasize that he's so right. Where we can learn the most is from those outliers, those exceptions. When somebody dies in an institution and they shouldn't be dying, we often go and look deeper. What happened? And there's often a cascade of failures. And so that's why we build in a lot of redundancy into our command, control, and security systems across many different disciplines and domains. We should still remain suspicious when there is a cascade of those failures in an environment that normally does not see them because those measures are in place. When that happens, I get very suspicious.
And I don't disagree with you, but I go back to my tagline for this podcast where I worry about our infrastructure. Yeah. The electrical grid is, 50, 60, 70-year-old equipment that is all interconnected, all interdependent. So if, some small electrical utility in Ohio isn't keeping up with their tree trimming and isn't keeping up with their IT security, that's going to impact every other domino that's all linked in together. So
you bet.
I think back to 2003 and like you, I was on the phone when it happened. I was trying to make dinner plans long distance to get together with a friend. We were a couple of 100 kilometers apart, and the power went out for both of us within a couple of seconds. To the point where it's like, okay, this isn't a tree branch in my neighborhood. This is something much bigger and much more problematic. And that was sort of my experience of how but at the same time,
to paint that picture a little bit there, Scott. So we're talking landlines at the time, right? Which means the phones were still working?
I don't remember if I was a landline or if I was a cell phone.
Okay.
But either way, I mean, when the system first goes down, there is still power.
Right. Yep.
Whether the backup lasts 10 minutes, an hour, 3 days.
Right. And you guys are a couple 100 kilometers away, so you're able to confirm to each other, hey, the power's out here and the power's out there.
Yeah.
This is weird.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this isn't just, your neighbor, a tree fell in your neighborhood. This was something big. And then the other sort of experience that touches on prepping, our local hardware store, operator owned and run and quite lovely. They changed their prices quite fairly, not gouging, but so that things were perfect even numbers. So, your pack of batteries was $5. So you're not trying to make change. You don't have to, your mental math is easy. Like 2 packs of batteries, that's $10. So it really goes to the very simple prep of keep cash on hand, right? Keep, especially some small.
I was waiting for that to surface. Yep. And there it is.
I mean, it is such a simple prep, and it has, I'm not worried about worms infecting the ATM and making my money inaccessible. I'm worried about someone unplugging the ATM and my money being inaccessible. So you keep some cash on hand so that, when we have to go back to when we're forced out of our plastic or internet-based economy and go back to just simple cash, you have some, right? It makes life easier. It's a prep that I think everyone can visualize, manage, and is perfectly reasonable and regardless of how tight your tinfoil hat is, having some cash on hand is not a bad thing.
I think probably
100%.
all of us, all the panelists, and probably everybody listening can recount at least one, if not two instances where having a little bit of cash on hand has saved them in just the smallest of situations, like trying to get a coffee at Timmy's and the power being out and none of the systems working, but you could pay for cash. And you know how bad it is if you can't get a coffee. So,
Yeah.
no, but everybody will have a similar story of some sort, like I said, listeners and panelists, about just having that cash in your pocket and getting you out of even just the simplest of scenarios. Totally worth doing that.
Definitely. And we should remind our listeners that was 20 years ago. Our culture was very different then. It was much more common for people to have cash in hand then. We already had a mistrust of checks. I remember this very clearly. There's a fair amount of check fraud already going around. And so we had an eye on safety and security of our finances. But few people were really focused on infrastructure, the things that allow you to live. I had a little bit with the 1998 ice storm that we experienced in the Ottawa area. But again, that was an outlier event. And in life, as a prepper, you don't really want to focus too much on all the outliers, but you should be aware of what they are so that you can govern yourself accordingly, as they say, right?
Right.
So, having a generator is better than none. Do you need the 6,000 water that can run your everything in the house? No.
Yes.
A lot of the people in there. See, there you go. That's a good way to look at it. Your needs might be different than mine.
Says the guy with the 10 kilowatt generator attached to the house.
Well, see,
Yeah, but it came with the house, Eric.
Show
It's not
off.
that you put it in.
but I'm frugal, right? So my spin on it will be different than anybody else's. But the whole
Fair
point here is to think, okay, what can you do if the power goes out 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? But what's most likely to happen? Are you most likely to have all your data stolen, or are you likely to have a power outage and maybe have data corruption?
Right.
Again, focus on what is most likely, because or else you can go crazy. There are people out there whose job it was, in my case, not longer, but whose job it is still to worry about all those things and try to give you some sense of normalcy, stability, and reliability in your world.
Right.
Or else you wouldn't buy their stuff, right? You wouldn't buy into it. So we have an interest in having that technology work for us. But the more you can be less reliant on it every day of every minute, the more satisfied you will be. If it ever lets you down, you won't regret that self-reliance. That's the angle I take on it.
So just in you saying, Gunny, you won't regret your self-reliance, I definitely don't regret what I bought that day. I had, like you said, you were around the Ottawa area in 98, and so was I. That was my big intro to preparedness and getting things in order. 5 years later, we have this power outage, and I still hadn't, collected and obtained a lot of things to be prepared, but I knew enough to have some things around, and I knew enough to have cash. I went to Canadian Tire, but the local one to me in Ottawa, and I bought a cooler. I bought a butane stove. I bought a wind-up radio. The cooler I still have. It is 20 years old, still keeps ice. Well, it says when it was new, it kept ice for 5 days. Now it keeps ice for 2.5 days. But it still does its job, and it hasn't broken. It has no leaks. The butane stove I still use. I've cleaned the nozzles and the jets on it a few times, replaced an O-ring. I can slap a fresh can of butane in that and boil water in 5 minutes. The wind-up radio, flashlight thingy, the same kind of thing that Eric sells at Rapid Survival. I actually did have to throw that out. The internal battery started to corrode and whatnot over some time, and I didn't notice it, and it was just corrupted. It was dead, and I threw it out. But I've gotten a replacement, thanks, Derek, and all is well. So I don't regret the cash that I had on hand that day. I don't regret the experiences of that evening, that night. I went and bought all those things and went to the local grocery store just down the street from me. Lots of people in there with cash, like you said, that we had lots of cash in those days. It was 20 years ago. There was an absolute idiot, 3 people in front of me, that had his Visa card out. Yeah, buddy, just turn the generator on in the back, and I can swipe the stripe, and all is good. And it took like 5 different people plus a couple of employees to let him to make him realize that there is no power. Like the phone line that those Interact machines used to run on, it is down as well. And if not, well, we can't get the power to the Interact machine to use it. So
it's going to take a few more generators to make the whole system work.
Yeah. Let's just fire those up. Not going to happen. But a lot of people came to other people's aid in Ottawa. I was living on Meadowlands Drive at the time. And that road is a main thoroughfare through one section of town. And it was beautiful because it was a beautiful starry night. Lots and lots of candle lights, flashlights, glow-in-the-dark stuff. All the kids had glow-in-the-dark stuff. You knew where everybody was.
Nope.
Plenty of barbecues. Oh, my goodness, I never smelled so much steak cooking at once.
Yep.
And it was great. There were 2 different people I remember quite specifically. They had brought their barbecues out of their backyard and a couple of propane tanks and just fired them up. Okay, what do you want me to cook? You like your steak rare? You like it medium rare? You like it well done? Yeah, is this good? Cool, no problem. Here's your baked potato. Have a nice night. Next, you want some hot dogs? You want some hamburgers? Cool, no problem. We got those. Next, they just kept cooking.
It was cool to see that. I had kind of similar experience in my neighborhood. Everybody just came out, and I remember very clearly just sitting on the back of my car, radio going, listening to the news, hearing what's going on, and everybody was out just talking and chatting. It was like a little bit of a neighborhood party. Now, had things have continued on, we probably would have seen a shift in that. But for the first couple of days, it was really neat to have everybody out and just chatting and, just being human. Right? It was really neat to see.
There was no social standing. Everybody was powerless.
Yeah.
Yep.
It didn't matter if you had 2 freezers of steaks in your basement or like I had a cooler on the lawn. Yep. Everybody had no power.
Yep.
It leveled that playing field beautifully.
Truly did.
Yep. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see where it went had things have extended past the 4 or 5 day mark.
Yeah.
Just solely because I like human nature and seeing how it unfolds. I would have been curious to see where things would have gone.
Pat,
but it was nice to see that everybody, when those couple of days, was just willing to help each other out and just be human, right?
Pat in the live chat there, yes, absolutely like Jericho the series. They should have continued that show. It was good.
Don't they cancel the greatest shows?
Yes,
here's the way it goes.
Jericho, Revolution, a couple.
Yeah, Scott's recommendation, hey, just think about what you would do when the power goes out. Think about all those little things you rely on every day. It doesn't take a lot of work. We did it, and we didn't know what we were doing back then in 02, 03. We thought, okay, what do we need to run servers for government? And so we just started thinking about it, and that's what you can do. It's not rocket science because it's only about you, right? What works for you. If you need a 10,000 kilowatt generator, hey, you can rock it. If, like me, you can get by on a little 1,000 water, you can do that too, right? Everybody's got a different way to deal with this preps, and that's the beautiful thing of it. All you have to do is look at what you're doing, what you rely on every day, what you would not like to do without for X number of days, and then think beyond that. Okay, what would happen if I go 3 weeks? Well, if you're really thinking about 3 weeks, it's because you've already addressed all the stuff that's in the immediate. And if you're there, you're doing better than most of us. So focus on, 2-3 days worth. Extended, well, that you're starting to go down rabbit holes. So, try to keep it real. Think of your immediate surroundings, you and your family, 4 or 5 days, right? How would you do it, right? One thing that I did as an exercise in IT all the time is I would always ask the question, how did we do it before computers? That's all I would ask. How did we do it before computers? Because we have a tendency to overcomplicate everything with IT and with technology at our hands every day. So
chisel and rock.
I just asked that question, right? How did we do it before that? And so I'd ask
we did it. We did it simplistically.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I would ask my mentor, hey, how did you do things before wood glue? And he looked at me funny, like he never had anybody ask him that. But that's the kind of question I've got is like, what did we use before wood glue? It's a genuine question.
Tar.
Why? Because I might be in the middle of the woods somewhere when something goes wrong and I don't have any wood glue, but maybe
tree sap
gum around, right? There's tree sap, right? So pine pitch. So again, if you just ask questions and go, how did we do it 20 years ago? And like Joan says here, while remaining calm, right? Then it's not such a big deal.
Right? I sound nostalgic because it's one of those things I don't want to ever forget. It's about the ice storm and about that power outage. And every time the power flickers here, like we had it go off milliseconds yesterday. And I only knew that I was out for a while, but I only knew that it went off because I got back and the kids told me, hey, the power went out. And sure enough, it did. Well, I went on and reset everything. But if it went out for longer, I know the cell phones around here would stay up for a while and I'd get a phone call or a text saying, okay, the power's out here. What do we do? And I've taught the kids kind of the first steps to do, and we all have battery chargers for our phones, and there's lots of USB devices in the house that can run off of very simple things, and do all those things and then keep going from there. But I don't think I would get really, really excited, Joan. I've been through enough of them now that I'm okay. I've got enough camping gear that as long as the weather holds and I can get fresh water and fresh eggs from a friend of mine down the road, I can stay okay here for weeks.
I do often wonder how such a thing would affect us today. I'm always curious when I hear of extended power outages and today, because I know it was like 20 years ago and I always have that baseline. But today as a society, we're very different than we were 20 years ago. A lot of people are caught in the dopamine loop of some kind. And when you upset that, you can get crazy reactions out of them, like of all kinds. Sometimes people don't act out, but sometimes they do. Just look at what happens when you deprive some adults of Wi-Fi, right? They get a little squirrely. So maybe one good way to prep, like I keep saying, is be a little bit more relaxed on the tech, pull back a little bit. Don't let it run your life so much. Maybe use it more as a tool than something that runs you. And you might find things are a little bit easier for everybody, but it's something you can do by example. I hear of younger people today who want to get off the smartphone and get onto the flip phone. That brings me a lot of joy because I'm in that camp myself. And so that means that there's other people who are in the same demand. And so if I pull out a flip phone next year, nobody's going to look at me terribly funny. I get a few looks, but I'm okay with it.
We'll still look at you funny.
Oh, sure. I can
still text T9.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Now we're going circa 2003.
I still remember the old dial phones.
Yep.
Rotary, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I actually have one. My boss was going to throw it out, and he was moving 2 years ago. And he brought into the office a bunch of stuff that he just wanted to get rid of, kind of like an office yard sale, but it was no money. Just take it. If you think you can use it, just take it. And I saw a dial rotary phone. I jumped on it when it put it in my car right away. Like, yes, I want one.
Nerd Me has one, and I'm trying to convert it to work on VoIP just because. It's one of my little projects. Anybody has any tips out there? You've done it before. Feedback at prepperpodcast.ca. Awesome. Any final comments before we move into the podcast challenge?
No.
Silence.
We've covered it all, haven't we?
I think we
have. But we've covered everything.
A whole lot more.
Okay.
Like
Maybe
I
not
said,
all.
we've covered it. We've covered enough that I'm going to lose some sleep cycles for the next week.
Here I go again.
All right. Scott, you want to bring us into the podcast challenge?
Consider what you would do if the power went out for a few days. Are there any simple preps that you can make now that will make your life easier.
Very nice. All right, Jeff, you got a weather blurb.
Sure. So what we've got going on, I mean, I talked about a little bit about the wildfires, but there is an incredibly rare, almost never heard of, tropical storm in the Pacific that is right now hitting California and the Baja Peninsula and whatever. A lot of areas have declared states of emergencies. They've got rainfall warnings, flash flood warnings all over Southern California and Mexico. Estimates are that they're going to get a year's worth of rain in a 24 to 36 hour window. The storm is projected to track just east of, now this is the core, the center of the storm. Obviously, everybody knows tropical storms are hundreds of miles wide. So it's not, if you're not, right in that window, don't think you're not going to get anything because you are. The storm's projected to track just east of Los Angeles and head on a northerly track into Nevada by tomorrow morning. It's then projected to continue going north into Idaho, Montana, possibly into Washington State. Who knows, maybe even up towards the U.S.-Canada border. The uncertainty of the path kind of once it gets north of Nevada is not very certain. There's lots of different ideas, ways it's going to go. I've got a link in there to an article from the LA Times. Just something to be aware of if you're out that way. Like I say, there's places in Southern California that have tropical storm warnings for the first time in history. So this isn't just a once in a 100-year storm. This is a once in a lifetime thing.
Why are storms so rare for California?
Hurricanes and tropical storms, because of the temperature of the ocean. If you look at the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean around Florida, they're warm. They're in the 80 degree, mid 80 degree temperature range. Usually the temperatures on the waters outside of in the Pacific Ocean are considerably cooler. The fuel's not there for tropical storms. They've had storms out there, but by the time they get to, they get to California, they get to land, they've lost a considerable amount of their energy. And this storm was so big that it just continued to barrel along, and it weakened out pretty quickly from a hurricane to a tropical storm, but the waters were just warm enough that it gave it enough fuel to keep it going.
Awesome question.
Interesting. All right, thanks, Jeff. With that, let's move into some shout outs. So, a quick shout out to Brian E.M., who it's first time listening to a live episode, mentions that just caught up on all the episodes over the last 10 months. That is dedication.
That's a lot of listening.
Yep. It's about, 212 episodes. I apologize for the first 20. Yeah.
And the next 200.
And the next 200, yeah. But welcome, Brian. I'm glad you could make your first live episode, and the dedication of catching up on all of them over the last 10 months is impressive.
Very.
Yeah.
All right. Any other shout-outs from panelists?
Cheryl says the same thing. First one for her today.
Awesome. Well, welcome Cheryl as well. It's always good to have new people join the live shows.
Cheryl will
keeps things
pick your
interesting.
brain on your pressure canner.
Nice. Good to know. All right. Well, with that, then I'll bring episode number 212 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or of course your favorite podcast app, as long as the power's on. Please help us out. Submit a review. It does help other people find us.
And we do record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast, and click the notifications tab. That gives you an alert when we are going live. If for whatever reason you want to reach out to me, you can get me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, or I am on the Discord.
I'm also not responsible enough to have my own email address. Scott can be found at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. And I think that, Brian, we're looking forward to all of your comments from your very hard work of getting through the catalog.
And Scott, you're going to be busy for the next little while anyway, so I'll collect the emails and forward it to you.
Appreciate it, buddy.
Oh, that's good. I can be reached at batbradcpp@gmail.com, or I'm batbrad on the Discord as well.
You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and on the CPP Discord.
All right. You can check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com and get me there on the live chat. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. And I do make the odd appearance on the Discord as well. You'll probably catch me replying to about month-old messages and apologizing for being late in replying. Thanks all for joining us this evening. Until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.